Hey everybody, Master Cicerone, Rich Higgins here today, and I'm going to be tasting the Saison Dupont from Brasserie Dupont in Torp, Belgium. This is a cork and caged finish bottle here. So always be careful when you're taking the cork off, never to move your thumb away from the cork. Always keep the cork capped with your thumb in case it wants to fly off. So normally I would like to pour this in a glass like this. This is called a Willebecker. It's actually a German glass. However, the classic Willebecker or sort of a farmhouse style glass is a straight sided, almost straight, kind of bowing out a little bit. But at any rate, tumbler, not a stemware. So normally I would do that. However, today I need a little bit more of this beer for another tasting. So we're going to just do a smaller pour of it into this stemware. And I do like this sort of goblet or stemware. Wine glass would work great for pretty much any beer. It just does a really good job of allowing you to inspect the beer, take a look at it, see the light shine through it without your hand being in the way, but also it has sort of an inward tapering, inward taper to the shape of the glass that allows the foam to get concentrated and the aromas to be able to be savored a little bit better. So with that gobbledygook out of the way, let's get into this beer. Okay, so as you can tell from the color, it is yellow or kind of a golden color. That means that it probably doesn't have any kind of caramelized or toasted or roasted malts added to it. It has a nice, big, thick white head of foam that is very typical for a saison. Saisons are often very highly carbonated beers, and sometimes this one is just brewed with barley, but sometimes they're brewed with wheat or spelt, other sort of grains that also help build a big head of foam on top. So let's take a smell. That's a good beer. Yeah, I love this beer. It's a great beer. Saisons are fun because they throw off a lot of kind of bright, high-toned fruits, but also by throw off, I mean they produce those aromas and they kind of jump out of the glass. So you get those kind of nice, bright fruits, but you also get a little bit of spice. And in, I think, the best examples of a Saison, there's always going to be kind of an earthy quality to it. So let's kind of go into those three categories here. So taking a smell, right off the nose, I get bright lemon, a little bit of orange, maybe like a Meyer lemon, which is kind of a cross between an orange and a lemon. So some nice citrus notes. There's a little bit of green fruit as well, maybe some green grape. Yeah, it's kind of like white winey flavor almost, but also maybe some touch of green kiwi. What is that other fruit? There's some sort of green. Maybe it's just a touch of apple. That's more of a bruised apple. Anyway, I'm kind of going down a rabbit hole on this. Anyway, a handful of different fruits present, and then let's talk about the spices. Okay, so I'm getting white pepper, very faint touch of clove, and faint touch of coriander. So the fruits that I'm smelling and the spices that I'm smelling are produced, those are flavors that are actually produced by the yeast. Okay, so during fermentation, yeast consumes sugars and turns them into alcohol and carbon dioxide. So you get booze, you get bubbles, but some yeasts also produce other aromas too. So they take all the nutrients from that barley and end up fermenting them and creating other aromas that are naturally occurring in other foods and plants and things like that. So that's why you might be able to smell other specific foods or fruits or spices or things like that in some beers. In this beer, it is coming from a lot from that yeast. I mentioned there's a nice kind of earthy quality to it also, and some of that is kind of an aroma of dough, and that is the aroma of the yeast itself. Okay, so there is yeast in this bottle. If you look at the beer, it's pretty clear, but not crystal clear, and it does so that little bit of haze is probably produced by the yeast that's in this bottle. There's also yeast at the bottom of the bottle that's collected here, and this is a bottle conditioned bottle or bottle conditioned beer, meaning that the beer went into the bottle still or flat, but it also was accompanied by a little bit of yeast and some fermentable sugar. And so the yeast consumed that final bit of fermentable sugar while inside the bottle, while the cap or the cork was on the bottle. So it trapped in that gas. So it carbonates it inside the bottle. It also produces an extra layer of fermentation flavors. And so when you're using a yeast or featuring a yeast that produces interesting flavors of whether it's orange and lemon or pepper or a little bit of clove, things like that, then those extra flavors get produced and kept inside the bottle, kept inside that beer, and the beer gets imbued with an extra layer of fermentation aroma. So that's a really nice aspect, it also produces a bit of a doughy aroma. That's kind of a nice thing about like champagne, for instance, or cava wine. So sparkling wines that have yeast contact that ends up developing a really nice kind of doughy, sometimes brioche or hazelnut aroma. Those are some of the terms that winemakers use to describe that yeast contact. But regardless, it gives it kind of a nice savory underpinning. We got all that fruit, we got that spice, a little bit of savory earthiness to it. There's also a touch of kind of a dusty cellar or like what would it be? I guess just a little bit of kind of dried leaves, dried mushrooms, and that is produced by the yeast. That's not the aroma of the yeast. That's actually more aromas that are produced by the yeast. So I'm sort of backing into this the wrong way. But anyway, Saison yeast is famous for producing kind of citrusy aromas, especially lemon, spicy aromas, especially pepper. And again, as I said, some also produce some of those earthy aromas. And I think that's a really nice sign of a Saison. Saison is a traditionally described as a farmhouse style ale. That doesn't really mean a lot, but farmhouse, it's sort of a nod in some ways to the fact that you do get some of those earthy aromas. Okay, so farmhouses you don't think of them being the most clean, the most modern. It's a bunch of aromas that harken back to an older time, older way of living, where there was a lot more kind of encroachment upon kind of earthy aromas, kind of encroaching into your daily life, and so that is definitely a factor of a lot of farmhouse style beers. So, what a farmhouse style beer is, the larger category and all that, that's a whole different discussion. That's people have written books about that. I'm happy to opine on that, but I'm not going to do that in this video today. Beyond that, let's not forget that there's malt added to this and hops. Okay, so those also bring their own aromas to the party. And so what I'm smelling in this one, malt wise, is a little bit of cracker, bread crust. Maybe not so much bread crust, but like bread, like baguette. It smells just like a kind of a French country bread or something like that. So I get some breadiness. Also a little bit of hay, maybe. It's like a kind of a straw aroma, the aroma of like dried hay, for instance. And then from hops, hops can smell like a whole lot of different things. The hops that are in here are, I believe, they're grown in Belgium. This is brewed right near the Belgian hop growing region of Poperinga. So this is brewed in Torp, which is in sorry, which is just southeast of Wallonia, where they grow a lot of hops. I think this is all local hops. If it's not, it's German varieties, or there might be Styrian Goldings, which is Slovenian, however, grown also in Belgium. At any rate, we have aromas of green tea, grass, dried woody herbs like dried thyme, dried oregano, things like that, as well as that might be it. I'm looking for mint. Sometimes you get peppermint out of this sort of hop, but I'm not smelling that right now. Okay, so I've talked this thing to death. Let's actually taste it as I smell again. That's fun. Yeah, that's great. Okay, so it's actually bringing out an aroma that Saisons can be known for also, which is the aroma of bubblegum. Sounds strange, but I think it is present in this beer. So bubblegum is sort of a proprietary blend of different aromas that go into different flavors. I don't know for sure, but I think it's known for having a little bit of banana, a little bit of strawberry, a little bit of vanilla potentially. I get that in this now that it's in my mouth, in my palate. So yeah, you can look for bubblegum aromas as well in this one. So taste, we're talking about a combination of sweetness, bitterness, and sourness. This doesn't have a lot of sweetness. It does have kind of a decent wallop of bitterness. I would put it at medium bitterness. Sweetness, I put it low to medium low. And acidity comes across as low to medium low also. I think so. This beer is kind of famous for having tricks up its sleeve, and I think some of the tricks are that it is in fact drier, meaning less sweet than you would perceive it as, and drier than you think it is. A little bit more sour than you would think it is, and a little bit less bitter than you think it is. Okay, so what's happening here is I think it's low sweetness, medium low plus, if that's dorky enough, sorry. So yeah, low sweetness, medium low plus bitterness, and medium low on sourness. But when those combine with some of those aromas, those sweeter smelling aromas of fruits and herbs, which aren't very sweet. Sorry, sweeter smelling aromas of fruits and spice. It ends up those aromas combine with what you're tasting to skew it a little bit sweeter, a little softer than in fact it is. Also, the bitterness builds and comes across as higher than it actually is because there's another thing in here that adds sort of a hardness or bitterness to the beer, and that's hilarious that I'm burping right now. That's CO2. Okay, so this is a highly carbonated beer. It's very moussey. It's champagne-like. That high carbonation is a way that the brewer wants this beer to seem more refreshing, more lively, more zesty on the palate, and it also pushes a lot of those aromas or amplifies a lot of those aromas. It just makes them more present. It's harder to ignore them either in the glass or when the beer's in your mouth. So that high CO2 is a nice thing about this beer, but it does lend a little bit of a minerally bitterness and just a real touch of acidity to the beer that keeps it drinkable, which is nice. But it also comes across as a slightly more bitter beer than I think, in fact, it is. So where we've gone is that the beer skews a little bit softer, so it's approachable. You get a little bit more fruitiness from all those aromas. And then you get a good wallop of bitterness plus that CO2 to keep it sort of lean and savory, so it's not just a kind of sweet fruit bomb or anything like that. So it's sort of the tale of two beers, and it's fun to see not only the different tastes play with each other. Think of like a graphic equalizer on a stereo system or something like that. You can dial up or down the bitterness, and dialing up or down the sweetness is going to affect how you perceive the bitterness too. Plus, there's a third one. There's the acidity, and then on top of it, it plays with aromas and also plays with high CO2 as well to create a really fun beer. At the end of the day, another important thing about refreshing is that it is not super full in body. Okay, so this is medium light in body, comes across as crisp. It's a nice, crisp, easy drinking beer that does have some good savory, herbaceous bitterness, as well as a lot of really beguiling fruit aromas and some spice aromas and earthiness. So it's really got a lot of complexity, and they all play very well together, all those different elements of the complexity. So in all, it's an absolutely fantastic beer and a fantastic example of the Saison style. Excuse me while I drink some more, because I think it's delicious. Okay, so it is 6.5% alcohol. So it's got some booze to it. It depends on who you ask. I guess if you ask some folks, that's pretty high. In Belgium, that's not terribly high. So there are a lot of Belgian beers that are in the 8, 9, 10% alcohol range. Also, plenty that are above that too, in the 11 and 12s. So this is sort of in the middle of the road for Belgium. It's pretty high alcohol for like the UK, the British and Irish brewing traditions. And I don't mean to imply that Ireland is part of the UK, but the British and Irish traditions do typically have less alcohol. So beyond that, it's going to pair with a lot of different foods excellently. Saison loves almost all sorts of foods except for particularly sweet foods and particularly roasty foods. So I would keep it in the range of cheeses, salads, fish, poultry, pork, fried foods as well. Soups, it's great with soups as well. Everything from chicken pho to a clam chowder, it would be excellent with. You'll notice a lot of the foods I've mentioned don't really carry a lot of color to them, and color is often a sign of either kind of a lot of interesting fruit flavors like dark berries, blueberries, raspberries, things like that, cherries. So that carries a lot of color. Also, the color can develop from a lot of cooking. So you either toast or roast or grill something or caramelize it. Those kind of toasty, roasty, grilled, caramelized aromas, really, I mean, they're okay with the beer, but the beer doesn't do them any favors, and they don't do any favors to the beer. So keep in the kind of the lighter, the paler spectrum of foods. I'm ignoring green, so certainly green is going to work. It's great with all sorts of vegetables of almost any preparation, from salads up to really nice sauteed or stir-fried vegetables. It's great with pastas. Oh man, like an Asian stir-fry. What is Asian stir-fry? There are a lot of different Asian stir-fries out there, but the ones that come to mind right now, I think it would work well with all. Okay, so I'm putting my foot in my mouth here. I'm excited about this beer. I think you should go out and find some and enjoy it. So that is, I'll face it a little bit better here. That is Saison Dupont from Brasserie Dupont in Belgium. All right, and I have been Master Cicerone, Rich Higgins. Enjoy. Cheers with my dorky thumbs up.